CGB, welcome back, buddy, for another video of punishment and torment. But I will let you know, you're going to be in your comfort zone this week because we're going to be talking about one of your favorite things and one of all card players' favorite things, card draw. Do you like to draw cards, CGB? You like to draw cards?
Yeah. So, like, maybe you have this. Do you have this shared experience? I have this with other card gamers, especially control players. You're just walking around, just living your life out in the world. You're looking at the world around you. Maybe you're taking a little nature walk with your dog. And you just, like, it pops into your head just out of nowhere of how good it would be to draw 2 cards right now.
I do have that shared experience, actually.
Yes,
I do.
Yes,
I do. I think a lot of people can empathize with that.
It's always a nice little draw 2. I pay 3 mana, I draw 2. Like, it's just like a little pot of greed, you know?
Well, remember,
Remember,
CGB, card draw in Yu-Gi-Oh! Comes at a premium because Pot of Greed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is banned. It wasn't always banned, but essentially since the ban list was created, Pot of Greed has existed on it. And so, as such, you're going to learn a lot about card draw in today's video. I got this video inspiration actually from our last video we did on your channel when you showed me Hole Breacher because that card was insane. I never thought I'd see a card stronger than Max C in my life, but you showed me one. So I thought it'd be fun to contrast the power of card draw in Magic to what we have available to us in Yu-Gi-Oh! So as always, I'm going to show you some cards. You have to tell us if you think it's good or not, and we're going to be doing the banned, limited, or unlimited games. You have to tell us if you think it's so good it got banned, if it's good but not ban worthy, or if it's perfectly fine being at 3. Sound good?
I've got the notebook.
Oh, you're going to learn a lot today. Let's show you your first card.
Jess Luda.
Correct.
Earth, 3, level 3, monster, 500 attack, 600 defense, zombie effect. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When this card is flip summoned, draw 1 card. When this card is flip summoned. I don't think I've seen the term flip summoned.
Okay, so a flip summon is basically this card would be set face down. Let's say it's your first turn. You would set this card in face down defense position, right? It's considered set. You know what that is. On the following turn, if you flip it from face down defense position to face up attack position, that is what is called a flip summon. Now, if this were to be attacked by an opposing monster and flipped up that way, that is not considered a flip summon. That is just considered it being flipped up.
Okay, flip summon has to be done on your turn at, in Magic terminology, sorcery speed.
Correct, unless there is another card or effect that can trigger a card to be flip summoned, but I will let you know those are very few and far between, especially at the time this card was printed.
So we have to play this face down, and then when it goes to our turn, this has to survive the turn, and then when it comes back to our turn, if we flip it up, we draw. And opponents, if they, on their turn, attack, they go at this thing. Because, like, you have to go through the monsters to get to the player, right?
Correct. Everything has taught.
You have to set this, it's face down, and it has to survive. So my first thought is that that's gotta be a pretty strong ask. Gosh, you have shown me very few monsters whose intention is to attack that have like stats lower than 600. So it feels like this dies to everything. Is what it feels like. So it feels like you set this face down, and on their turn, they're just going to be like, well, if this card were a popular card in the meta, then I'm just going to like, well, attack that with my 600 attack or more and murder that thing. And you never get to draw a card. That immediately seems like a slow way to get value that would not fly very well in Magic. I guess the good side is it comes to your turn, you turn it face up, right? You draw your card. Can you turn it face down again?
Yes.
When?
Immediately at any point during your turn. You can flip it back down.
Okay. So you can flip this face down again. All right, so if it makes it through the first turn, you get a card. If it makes it through another turn cycle, assuming that these are good things that you want to be doing, like basically everything's going your way, you get another card and another card. I just don't feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the kind of game where things get to sit on the board. It's similar to like Magic in that way. Like there are cards that are very good in this way though. Like I compare this to like Dark Confidant. This is like a Dark Confidant in Magic with no drawback. Dark Confidant's a creature, you know, on your next upkeep, basically you get a card, but you lose life equal to the card's mana value.
That sounds broken.
This doesn't have a drawback here. So, I mean, is this Dark Confidant for Yu-Gi-Oh?
I don't know. Is it?
You just said Dark Confidant sounds broken.
Yeah, okay, recite that again so I can understand it correctly. Is it you said go just recite it again.
So Dark Confidant is a 2-mana creature, and at the beginning of your upkeep you reveal the top card of your library and you take damage equal to its mana value and you put it in your hand.
That is broken by Yu-Gi-Oh standards, yes. I think everyone would play that card.
Then this has to be broken, kinda.
Unless I'm just messing with you.
You could be messing with me. I mean, that's the idea, is like they have to deal with this or you're just going up cards. On its own, I would have said this dies to everything, but so did Dark Confidant. And Dark Confidant was insanely good. And Dark Confidant costs mana. This is free. So you just set this on turn 1, and if they don't deal with it, if their hand just doesn't line up for that, or they're dealing with other things, or you can protect it in some way, you're just rolling, and your opponent's probably outvalued in 2 or 3 turns. It's just over. Yeah, I mean, so you're saying, like, on your turn, you can flip this back up, draw a card, then flip it back down. Yep. If you wanna. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna say that this card is good. Was it restricted? Was it banned? When did this card come out?
This was very early on in Yu-Gi-Oh! So this was 2003. 2003.
Ban it. Ban. It got banned at some point. Banned. Card draw's better in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than it is in Magic. So I'm gonna say at some point this got banned.
All right, final answer.
Yeah.
Jess Luda was the backbone of a strategy colloquially known as Pac-Man. Pac-Man, the acronym, stands for Pure Advantage Camel Munches All Noobs. And you are looking at the Pure Advantage Camel right here in Jess Luda. But that deck sucked, and this card has never been on the ban list anywhere. So you are way off on this.
Oh, we're starting off good. So is Dark Confidant broken? I don't understand. What am I missing?
So there's a lot of things. Like, by older Yu-Gi-Oh standards, I think there's a lot of things that are, like, wrong with this. Like, one of the nice things about Jess Luda is that the fact it's face down, it actually has protection from a lot of different removal effects, because a lot of different removal effects have to go after face up things. There are specific ones that go after face down, or if they're board wipes, they don't care. But a lot of removal goes after face ups. The problem isn't necessarily Jess Luda. It's the fact that it plays in these, like, stall control decks that are playing all of these floodgates that are preventing the opponent from doing anything. And it doesn't really have, like, a crazy win condition, and it's sort of like death by 1,000 cuts. So the problem is it just gives the opponent too much time to find ways to, like, eventually win the game. And that's why this deck, it was a deck that was played, but it was never, like, the best deck ever, and it was always considered, like, you know, a rogue deck at best. It's playing all these, like, very slow type of cards that eventually, if your opponent finds answers to the things protecting these types of cards, they're just going to blow you out because they're playing way better monsters than you. So unfortunately, this card is just not very good. I don't know. It's like what you're describing with that Dark Confidant card, just the fact that you get an extra draw every turn. It's similar to this, but I think I don't know. I think it's different. And for some reason or another, I just think it's different.
Okay. Let me know in the comments how it's different, because what I heard from all that is that there's a flaw in your game that means that just nickel, dime, 1,000 cuts control, my favorite archetype ever, doesn't actually win.
It can win. It depends on, like,
flaw. There's a flaw in the game that says if people can overpower a control deck that goes long, something's wrong with your game. You need more counter spells or something.
The bigger issue is that a lot of the cards that are used to protect these types of advantage generating cards, eventually, like, there are enough answers in the game, especially by older Yu-Gi-Oh, that those cards just will get blown out, and then these guys don't do anything at the end of the day. So it's almost like too slow. And I think the difference is, I think with, like, Confidant, there would be, like, ways where you could, like, you can, like, cheat this out during, like, the end of your opponent's turn, so that way you get the extra value during your standby phase, right? Because it's face up instead of Jess Luda having to be face down. I don't know. I think there's, like, a lot of differences to what you're describing. I see you sent me Dark Confidant so I could see. Cool art, by the way. Neat card. I do think both of these cards are way too slow for actual modern Yu-Gi-Oh! For what it's worth. But the fact that there is like a card that exists that just lets you get an extra card, at the end of the day, that does appeal to people considering that card draw does come at a premium. So I thought this would be a fun one to start with.
Yeah, fun.
It's funny you sent me Dark Confidant because this next card I'm showing you actually looks very similar to it. Give this one a read. Am I right? It looks like almost the same card in a lot of ways.
Bob Maher is angry at you. So Dark Confidant is also affectionately known as Bob because back in the day when you won a special tournament for like the best of the best players, you got a card like with you. Basically you as in art on the card.
That's cool.
So this is based on an actual person. And now you're saying that Upstart Goblin looks like Bob?
Kind of.
Okay. Okay. Let me know in the comments. Upstart Goblin is a spell card. How does that make any sense? It's a goblin. How's a goblin a spell? Anyway, draw one card, then your opponent gains 1,000 life. Oh, I play this all day.
Okay.
Oh, it's not close. I don't care what their life total is. It sounds like my deck, though. It sounds like my style, the Death by 1,000 Cuts. I would have played the Camel deck, right? And I would have actually won games because that's my style, and like that works in Magic. I would play this 100 times over. Like, just give the opponent 1,000 life and draw a card for free. I would play that in Magic where they gained a literal 1,000 life because my win con's not gonna care. Oh man. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! So again, 8,000 life is the total?
Correct.
Okay.
3 copies per card.
And they can go over 8,000 life, is that true?
Oh, 100%.
I still think this is busted.
Why do you say that?
I still think this is busted because like a card has to be like the value of a card in an eternal format. All your cards should be busted and contribute to your totally busted plan. Your totally busted plan, it is possible in an aggro type deck, like something that is full on just go for face. It is possible that 1,000 life throws off your plan. You are doing something where you special chrono, synchro, whatever, summon like 50 things, pull off combos in an overwhelming state of affairs, right? Combos, overwhelming resources. This just gets you closer to those things, and the 1,000 life shouldn't be the difference between winning the game or not.
Okay.
The kind of the question about this card is how balanced Yu-Gi-Oh! Around the 8,000 life points, and I imagine this card gets better and better and better the more powerful the monsters and the win cons and the combos get. Over time, this probably gets better and better and better and better. And yeah, as the game progresses, this only gets nastier. So now we're talking about 3 spots in probably every deck other than like some aggro deck that's trying to hit the perfect amount of damage every time. So that's a lot of spots. That's a lot of time. And that's a lot of money people aren't spending on other cards. So in an eternal format, I don't think this lasts as a 3-of. I don't think so. I don't think so. As restricted, maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine restricted. Maybe. Like, this is the kind of card that I could see. Like, restricted is fine. But here's the weird thing about the card. How much do you love the card? Does anybody love this card? Like, actually love this card? I mean, I play it, but, like, after you play it the first 4 or 5 times, like, where's the dopamine, right? It's just a card. You get your life. I draw again. Okay. You know, there's nothing exciting about it. Whereas you kind of want your one-of cards to have some amount of like exciting attached to it. And even as a one-of, like every non-extreme aggro deck is probably like, yep, that's a card. Because the idea is you want to draw your best cards. I guess the only way that this gets pushed out of a deck is if every card is so good that why would you give the opponent 1,000 life to get another one? If every single card close to in the range of your best card, if the whole deck was that perfected, you wouldn't need this. But that's so unlikely. Like that, and in Magic that would never happen because we have a land system that provides a lot of variance to the game. I wonder if I'm overrating that kind of deck thinning effect that the land system kind of creates for Magic. I might really be overrating that, but I still see it this way. There's probably one card, if this is restricted, there's probably still one card in every deck you would prefer were the other card that's better, and it should just be an Upstart Goblin instead to give you a chance to draw that card sooner. I could see it holding on to restricted. I could also see it just being banned. It is kind of nonsense. It is kind of nonsense.
Remember, our decks are 40 cards, too.
Yeah, I know. That's because you don't have like 20 some lands to put in every deck. So it's not that similar to, it's not that different from Magic.
It is, because everything's free.
Including this, except the 1,000 life points. Yeah, I might be overrating this from a Magic perspective. I'm still going to say it got banned at some point. I just don't, it's not very exciting. It takes up space in decks. I can see people like, I'm trying to put myself in the minds of the Yu-Gi-Oh creators, and they have a different approach to bans, which is to, in some ways, to sell cards and to keep the game fresh. Eventually, there's no freshness in this card, you know? I think, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'll go with that.
Upstart Goblin has been all over the place. What might actually interest you is the fact that starting out in Yu-Gi-Oh, people sort of didn't really value Upstart Goblin at all unless they were playing a deck that was working towards like an alternate win condition like Exodia, I would say. But for the most part, people just wouldn't play it just because I just don't think people valued having 3 less cards in their deck. It really took the game getting to about the middle of its lifespan in like the 2014, 2013 era when some higher level thinkers and pro players in the community realized that, you know, valuing this type of consistency was so good that playing 3 copies of Upstart Goblin in every deck was essentially mandatory. And then everyone essentially started to follow suit. And so that was like known as like the Upstart theory back in the day. And ended up getting the card limited at some point. And what happened was it's in like limited and semi-limited and unlimited. It's been like all over the place. But then as, like you said, in an eternal format, eventually more cards are released to make a card like this become even more valuable. You mentioned about aggro decks might not want to play this. Aggro decks don't really care because usually a lot of decks that are aggro decks can put over 8, 9, 10,000 damage on the board, and they don't care about if they give their opponent the extra 1,000, 2,000, whatever. So that doesn't actually affect the aggro decks. That's how crazy our aggro decks can actually get. They released some cards later on that relied on the number of spell cards in your graveyard, and if you met a threshold of those spell cards, they got extra effects, and Upstart Goblin was basically 3 free spell cards you could throw into your graveyard, which is ultimately one of the reasons why this card ended up getting restricted one of the times that it did. And now, as a matter of fact, it's interesting. You actually were starting to go down that line of thinking, but then you're like, but I don't see a world where that happens. Upstart is, I believe, unlimited at this point because each individual card has to be so powerful.
God.
Especially after the last video we did where I showed you about hand traps and turn 0 interaction. You would rather have either a card that is so powerful that it's going to help your main engine or win condition, or a card that's going to stop your opponent from achieving theirs. That Upstart Goblin actually doesn't make the cut anymore. So it's actually unlimited. The highest it's been, it's limited, so you were incorrect. You did say banned. You almost got it, but very interesting card. Very interesting card.
I feel like I danced around the spirit of the argument. I don't feel too bad. That's awesome that, you know, just like all your cards are already your best and most important cards. That's great.
Yep.
That's
all right.
Nice for you.
You know, Pot of Greed. What do you think about this guy?
Jar of Greed. It's a trap card? Draw 1 card? Why is it a trap card?
You tell me.
I don't know. Maybe make some trap archetype thing work. Some special if you have this many traps, or I don't know. It seems so. As a trap card, you can set it face down, and then you can activate it on the opponent's turn,
or your own turn. Just you can't activate the turn that it's
whenever.
Yep. Whenever. Yep.
I would say probably the thing about the trap card is you set it face down, and then maybe there are other effects that make you like discard your hand, or ways that the opponent interacts with your hand or does something mean to your hand. And then you can flip this like basically you have a card in the bank. You don't know what it is, but you have a card in the bank if something bad were to happen to your hand. That's what I'm guessing. It's another but it is like I mean, is there anything to stop you from just playing this and drawing a card immediately?
No. Like, you could set it past the turn. As soon as your opponent takes their first draw for the turn, you could flip this up and draw a card. Yeah, that's fine.
Can you just play it face up and draw a card on your turn?
Unless there's a card that... Well, if it's the turn after you set it, yes.
But as like, a general use, no, you can't just... If I have nothing in my hand and nothing on my board, because things are really bad for me, and I draw this, I have to put it face down, pass to the opponent, then draw the card. Well, at least that's a bit of a downside. There is kind of a tempo thing there. This reminds me of a card called Mishra's Bauble. And Mishra's Bauble, it's basically a 0 mana artifact, and you sacrifice it, and then you draw a card on the next turn.
Okay, that sounds similar. Okay.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Okay.
This reminds me of that. There's a lot of formats where Mishra's Bauble is busted. It's just busted.
Okay.
There are things you get for playing 0 mana spells. There are things you get for having certain numbers of artifacts. There are things you get for having certain numbers of cards in graveyard. I guess this stays on the board until something destroys it. So the graveyard thing isn't a good argument. But like, yeah, there's a few ways that Mishra's Bauble is busted. This kind of avoids a lot of them by just sitting on the battlefield. But it is another one of those ways to just dig through your deck. But the velocity is an issue. I am guessing the velocity is an issue. Card velocity being like you want to be seeing multiple cards at times you can use them, and there's like a delay with this card. There are the combo potentials, though, like I said, with like wheel effects. Basically discard your hand, and then you can use this later. This is like, it's tough to evaluate how these different downsides tie into Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like a turn in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a big deal. I feel like having a card in your deck that gets you a card later is a much bigger deal in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Okay.
Maybe I'm crazy, but that's how it feels. And then you're looking for, if you're playing this card, you're looking for probably just some ways somewhere in your deck to interact with these kind of trap cards. Maybe something that returns them to your hand or something so you can keep getting more value. But that sounds like a little nichey, and I haven't seen any things like that.
I will let you know there are things that would allow you to do such a thing. Yes.
But are they good? They sound slow for Yu-Gi-Oh! Terms. And if the camel's not good, is a Jar of Greed good?
I don't know. You tell us.
Yeah. I know. It's my job. And since I'm so great at this, I think that this one's a little bit slow, but we're talking about an eternal format. Over time, the value of the card is going to have a similar trajectory to the Upstart theory. Like, is this Upstart theory 2.0? Did they have to restrict this too because everybody was playing it? The delay on the card is a big deal. Also, are you limited to the number of board spaces you can have for traps?
Yes, you can have a maximum of 5.
Okay. Well, if you have 3 Jar Greeds in a lot of decks and you want to run any other traps, these can just sit there taking up spots. That's a problem. That's also a downside.
But you can also fire them at any point.
Fire them?
Like, you can activate them at any point, as long as it's not the turn you've set them.
Okay. But, I mean, if you activate them, it still sits there, right? Or does it go to the graveyard?
Sorry. A regular trap card, after you activate it, goes to the graveyard.
Oh!
It's not continuous.
I've spent this whole time thinking it stays out there.
Oh,
like
no.
So, there, it draws you a card and then smiles at you like an asshole taking your spot.
No.
Okay.
No.
It does go to the graveyard. So
yes.
It's even more Mishra's Bauble than I thought.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry. The only ones that stay out if they're continuous, if they have that infinity symbol next to where it says trap card, then they will stay occupying a slot. But regular trap cards, you activate them, the effect resolves, they go to graveyard.
All right. Well, I think there is a serious risk of this video just turning into that card draws a card, ban it from me, because that's where things are headed. I mean, it all looks awesome to me. It all looks like the best thing I could possibly do in my game. But this one is much closer. It's not fine, I would say. The fact that it does go to the graveyard is a big advantage. But similar to the last one, like I think I'm going to have to go with kind of the Upstart Goblin as my gut check on this, because this is a very similar card with a similar trajectory. I think that it may have also been restricted at a point, but probably not banned, especially if Upstart Goblin was never banned. I think Upstart Goblin's a better card. I think that this, though, serves a similar function in decks hoping to play multiple turns. And I do think the tempo thing is potentially dangerous, but there were probably decks that would still just fill a lot of spots with it. I'll say that this, at some point, got the Upstart theory check and was also restricted, but not banned.
So Jar of Greed has had an interesting trajectory throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Similar to Upstart Goblin, it followed the trend, it's good you made that comparison, where it was basically only included in decks like Exodia decks, where you're trying to draw, the 5 pieces of Exodia, combo decks that are trying to fulfill some sort of other weird win condition, right? Just so you can find more pieces and have a thinner deck. That was this card's history for the most part. There were other strategies. I don't want to get into them because they're kind of complicated for those wondering. I'm talking about like chain strike decks, different things like that. That's where a card like this would shine. Jar of Greed, for the most part, didn't see a lot of play, primarily because it was a trap card. There's a big difference between a spell card and a trap card in Yu-Gi-Oh! In that a trap card, you have to set it face down for a turn in order to actually activate it. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Has aged, that has proven to be a horrific downside to the functionality of how trap cards work. And so as the game progresses, trap cards have to do more and more to fight for deck space, and they have to do a lot unless the deck is a control deck that, like, there's a reason to play a bunch of trap cards. For those watching, I'm talking about, like, Labyrinth, for instance, like in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! To want to play cards like this, let's say. Now, what's interesting about where we're at now is how this card is aged, in that in an Eternal format, Jar of Greed sees no play. But in the retro formats that are alternative formats that are going back to 2010, 2005, people have actually started to play this card in multiple quantities. This, as well as a card for Edison format known as Legacy of Yatagarasu, which is basically just three more copies of Jar of Greed. So it's like you have 6 of them. Where these cards have proven their worth is actually, you pointed it out. You talked about how if there are effects that would affect the opponent in the hand. I don't know if you remember Trap Dust Shoot, when you had that visceral reaction of you look at the opponent with 4 more cards and you shuffle a card back. Having a card like Jar of Greed lets you play around that because Trap Dust Shoot requires you to have 4 more cards in hand in order for that card to be activated. So if you have multiple copies of these Jars of Greed, for instance, you can set them down. Your hand is effectively always under 4 cards, but you still have those cards, in quotes. They're just in your back row instead of being in your hand, so you're always able to play around this sort of effect, which is very powerful. Any sort of hand destruction type effect, a card like this can be valuable. But most notably, where Jar of Greed actually generates its advantage is more in providing card disadvantage for the opponent. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let's say all you do is your first turn, you set Jar of Greed face down and end the turn. Let's say your opponent activates a spell card that says, destroy an opponent's spell or trap card, right? In response to that, you can chain the Jar of Greed. So now not only did your opponent lose a card because the Jar of Greed is going to replace itself and they wasted that spell card, but also that spell card is out of their deck. So now if you have an actual real trap card that can maybe, let's say, destroy an opponent's monster or something like that, they wasted that removal on that Jar of Greed instead of the real card. So these cards have actually become very known for baiting the opponent into using their powerful effects and actually creating card disadvantage instead of giving the player straight card advantage. So at the highest levels of play, these cards are very deceptive and tricky and provide a lot of fun. And it's cool to see that these old formats have evolved to play multiple copies of these cards in their decks.
In the digital format, if you get got by Jar of Greed, I bet people, like, in Magic, they just scoop immediately. Oh,
you're grinning like this guy on Jar of Greed. That's how you're feeling in that moment. That's how you're feeling.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we've got some ground to cover. Let's draw some more cards, shall we? Let's draw some more cards. Here's one for you.
Yamada Dragon, Fire Dragon Spirit with 7, level 7, attack 2600, defense 3100, big bootay. Okay. Big creature in general. Holy crap. Cannot be special summoned. I bet the rest of the text is some funky way to otherwise special summon it. This card returns to its owner's hand during the end phase of the turn. It is normal summoned or flipped face up. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, draw cards until you have 5 cards in your hand. Oh, hello. Oh, what a nice creature. Okay, so you have to tribute summon it, is what it's kind of saying.
Correct. You do have to tribute summon it. You cannot cheat this out.
Okay, but that's not when the damage happens. So when you deal damage, you draw up to 5 cards on the spot.
Correct.
And then at the end phase, you return it.
Correct.
Okay. It has to hit the opponent?
No. Battle damage is any damage that would be done through battle. So hypothetically, if your Yamada Dragon would hit my monster with less than 2600 attack, I would take that damage, and that is battle damage, so Yamada Dragon would trigger, and you would draw up to 5.
It just has to hit anything. It has to hit anything with a lower defense than its 26 freaking hundred attack.
If it's in defense, I would take no damage. So that's one big difference.
Yeah, defense mode, attack mode, right.
Correct. We have different modes.
2600 is huge.
It's quite big.
Like you can just you can basically try to plow the way. I mean, you put this card in your deck, you want to plow the road, you want to remove some stuff, right? You want to, or make this bigger or something, so that you're getting hits that draw you cards. But yeah, it's like, I imagine the way that a game of Yu-Gi-Oh goes is like you're dumping you dump out your stuff. You already had to summon this thing. And then it goes bam, and you're like, and I draw up to 5, and then you can play more stuff, and then this comes back to hand, so they can't attack it or kill it.
Sounds good, yeah.
And you can do it again the next turn? This is insane! What the hell? This is nonsense. They have to trap it. Like they have to have some kind of, in Magic we call instant speed interaction. They have to kill it on your turn. They have to interact. They have to trap it. And like we've talked about it, like trap cards are fighting for spots. Not every deck wants to run those. They're conditional. You don't always have the right answer at the right time. This card is a menace. A menace. What a beautiful creature.
I thought you'd like this one. I thought you'd like this one.
When my opponent has it, I hate it. I just hate it. I hate it so much. When I have it, get good, noob. Like, why aren't you running interaction? More traps. Oh, man. Nah. Oh, God. Is it busted? It feels kind of busted. This feels kind of busted to me. It does require you to play a certain way. It sounds like the game has moved in a direction that's all about special summoning a whole bunch of stuff. And this can't be special summoned. You got to kind of play old Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way. You got to tribute summon this thing, right? But, I mean, cards are worth it.
And to be fair, you can special summon other monsters to tribute summon for this. It doesn't say you can't do that. So
Right. So, yeah, you special summon your whatever big board effect, kill their things, then you tribute that into Yamada Dragon, and you punch their face and you draw up to 5. And assuming that they don't just quit and walk away from the table, this comes back to your hand so you can do it next turn.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I want, it's all busted to me. Every card, every draw 1 card for free, busted. Every draw 5 cards, busted. It's all awesome to me. I can't get a single one of these right because I can't be objective about any of this. My heart doesn't allow it. It's all insane to me. This is the worst video I've ever made, and I've never been happier.
This is your equivalent of me doing the prices.
This seems okay, but now we're chunk drawing, right? That's way, like, there's different kinds of draw. There's the consistent every turn draw of the camel, which is fine. There's the draw a bunch of cards with the upstart goblin jar greed. Is it fine? Is it not fine? We don't know. It's up and down over history. Apparently it's fine in some ways and unfine in others. Definitely useful. And then this is just like rip, new grip, rip, new grip. This seems brutal. I don't know if people can stop it. Maybe the interacting with like a normal summon even doesn't seem that like they have to interact with it or it just beats them into the ground. It feels like one hit from this is probably backbreaking because card draw is at a premium in your game. Dude, this seems more. I bet nowadays you're gonna tell me it's fine. It seems like back in the day this was a big bad to me. It seems like back in the day they probably had to do something about this at some point. Restricted might be fine because at least restricted, maybe you have like the standard 4 to 6 trap cards that would mess with it in a lot of competitive decks, and there's only 1 of it, so it's more likely to get handled than if there's 3 of it. Still, I want to say this was at some point banned because it just seems like every deck would revolve around this somehow. It seems like every deck would be smashing with this. Every single one. Why wouldn't you? There's not a lot of good reason not to. Sure. Let's make this the banned video. Look at this banned card. It's drawing up to 5 cards. This card is busted. This card sucks. This card is so bad.
All right, let me give you the context. I didn't even want to slow roll that one. I didn't want to slow roll that one.
No. You're still slow rolling. Just get over. Yes, you made your funny joke. Now tell me how busted it is.
I'm not. This card sucks.
What the hell, dude?
This card has
What
had.
the hell?
Okay. Let me give you the context. So again, old Yu-Gi-Oh card. The thing is, it is not impossible to go like, maybe you have a guy on the field from a previous turn. You special summon a guy, you sack them both because you have to tribute 2 things. It is level 7. You bring out the Yamada Dragon. You go in for the attack. You're going to draw 5 cards, and your opponent flips a trap card and kills this, and you just lost 3 cards for their 1. From a card advantage perspective, this thing has no protection. The chances that it will die is I'm not going to say it's guaranteed, but most likely there is going to be something your opponent has to stop this from happening. I'm sure there have been times that people have been hit by Yamada Dragon. I'm not saying it's never happened, but the times that it has happened are very few and far between. Now, it is not to say that there is not small stints in time where this card has seen a modicum of success. In Dragon Ruler format, for instance, for people who know what that is, this card was played just because it technically is a fire dragon and also could just refill their hand. And that whole deck special summon, so you could get away with not needing a normal summon to bring this out. It's been played in that. Theoretically, Edison can play this card, right? Another retro format. There are instances and just small examples of a time where you could play this card. But the amount of work that you have to put into bringing this out, the chance it will die, and the fact that it comes back to hand, you think is a good thing because it kind of protects itself in a way. For this, it's bad because you have to tribute summon 2 more things to bring this thing back out to the field, right? And so the fact it can't be special summoned is a huge downside, so you can't cheat it into play. I think if you could special summon this card would actually be way better and might actually have been way more playable. But unfortunately, our good old friend Yamada Dragon here is just relegated to the bulk bin, sadly. Sorry to crush your spirit there, buddy. You seem so excited.
I'm never playing this game. Never.
All right.
The dream
I'll
is
help you
dead.
out. I'll help you out. The video's not over. Don't worry. The video's not over. You got a chance.
Is that an option?
You got a chance. Here, this one. I think you'll like this one.
Card destruction. Both players discard as many cards as possible from their hands. Then each player draws the same number of cards they discarded. It's Windfall. It's a magic card called Windfall.
Windfall is exactly this text?
No, actually it's not. Windfall is draw cards equal to the greatest number of cards discarded this way.
Ooh, that's a big difference. Yeah.
It is a big difference because this is Tolarian Winds. That's what this is.
Okay, so that card is exactly this.
Windfall got banned. Tolarian Winds did not even get restricted. Yeah, because you're down a card when you play this. That's the catchy catch. If Tolarian Winds were free,
how much does Tolarian Winds cost?
Pretty cheap. Winds of Change is both players shuffle the cards in their hand into the deck and draw that many cards, and that's only 1. That doesn't really see play. You're down a card. I mean, that's as close to free as we're going to get in Magic. There is the discard angle, which is graveyard is a second hand, but if that's true for both players, then you're helping both players. What would make this card busto? Obviously, you combine it with the Jar of Greed.
You could.
That's even dumb. That's even dumb. Nah, because there's no way to get up cards. You're only getting back what you discarded. If you are a graveyard combo deck and you play this on your turn and you're literally going to win the game, you're inviting a lot, not give the opponent the opportunity to do anything. Or if you're playing something that'll exile their graveyard, is still inviting a ton of RNG. I think the Magic principle applies, and I think that being down a card makes this not worth it. So I am going to say this card is fine.
Final answer? Okay, this is your worst video yet. This card has been basically limited throughout all of the 23 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was banned, actually, for a third of that time as well. Card destruction is nuts.
So how do you break it? How do you get on the right side of it?
So the reason why card destruction is OP is because in Yu-Gi-Oh!, similar to Magic sometimes, the graveyard is a second hand. And so while yes, this card does come at card disadvantage because you are taking a -1, typically you're going to be playing this card in a deck where you want to send like 4 or 5 cards from your hand to the graveyard to draw a fresh grip, and you're going to make up that advantage by the cards going to the graveyard, helping you set up for combo plays, or those effects just triggering to regenerate that advantage for you, if not get you a head advantage, after resolving that card destruction. So let me give you a good example. When card destruction was banned, it was during a time where some of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Were decks that solely played out of the graveyard. I'm talking about Dragon Rulers, but also a deck known as Dark World, which Dark World, their whole gimmick as an archetype was that their effects triggered when they were specifically discarded to the graveyard. So if you activate card destruction and discard 4 Dark World monsters to the graveyard, you not only drew 4 extra cards, because obviously you lose the card destruction, but all 4 of those Dark World monsters would trigger and then let you either draw cards or special summon them out to the field, and just basically make it that you ran away with the game, because if your opponent wasn't playing that deck, you're just going to steamroll them because you're just going to be so far ahead in advantage that it's insurmountable for them to come back. And Dragon Rulers was also like the absolute worst example of this, because that whole deck, the monsters would just special summon themselves out of the graveyard. They're gigantic, they're recursive, and just getting more and more resources to work with. The card destruction was just an absolute menace. Even to this day, card destruction is still restricted to 1. It has seen modern play. It is very contextual on the format, but for the most part, this card is absolutely bonkers in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Okay, doesn't... Like you said, it triggers the opponent stuff too. Does that just, I guess they're saying this card just homogenized the format?
Yeah,
like
so
everybody had to play it?
It's an example of if card destruction is being played, it means that there isn't just like a singular best deck. Maybe there are 2 or 3 decks, or maybe even 4 that are the best decks at any given moment. And the decks that are playing card destruction, when they go up against the opponents that aren't playing decks that benefit from their hand getting sent to the graveyard, let's say, then card destruction is kind of like an auto win button. Like if it resolves, like they're just going to be so far ahead that the game is effectively over. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Has aged, there are more and more counters to a card like card destruction. Don't get me wrong. But it's just a card that if a deck isn't playing out of a graveyard and a deck is, and card destruction resolves, the deck that plays out of the graveyard just is going to basically win the game, essentially. It's just an extremely powerful card, especially when card draw is at such a premium. There's so many graveyard-based effects to get value out of the graveyard that the -1 on card destruction becomes a positive more often than not, if that makes sense.
I guess I still thought every deck used the graveyard, so I didn't see how it was a... Like, you're saying it was busted if a graveyard deck played against a non-graveyard deck. I thought every deck used the graveyard.
Not every deck. Not like, so it's depending on where you're looking at in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. In old Yu-Gi-Oh, yeah, every deck, because it was kind of like a lot of good stuff decks, a lot of decks would play things that are like, oh, you know, I can revive something from the graveyard. Maybe I want to get something in there to cheat it out. That was very common. But as Yu-Gi-Oh! Moved and decks became more archetypical, where it's like you're playing like a bunch of different cards that work very well together, but are kind of xenophobic to other archetypes, some of those might be graveyard-based, some might not be graveyard-based. Like, there's advantages and disadvantages, and that's how Yu-Gi-Oh! Design sort of shifted. So that way you're not just playing good stuff, like there's advantages and disadvantages to play. Kind of like how they divide the colors up in Magic and the color pie. Archetypes are kind of like our equivalent of the color pie, where you play this archetype to do this cool thing. You play this archetype that does this other different thing, etc., etc. But you don't have to only play those types of cards. You can kind of splash them together, but not every deck might have like a couple cards that do something in the graveyard, but one deck might have 30 cards that do something in the graveyard, where one deck might have like 3, as an example. So it really is just dependent on the deck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. It's great.
You're doing good. You're doing good, buddy. You're doing good. All right, next one.
Reckless Greed. Trap card. Draw 2 cards and skip your next 2 draw phases. I don't want to skip my next 2 draw phases.
But it's Pot of Greed. You get to draw 2. It pluses you. It's card advantage.
They're doing the thing they do in Magic, which is make the card you want with the monkey's paw.
Look at that guy in the artwork. That's you right now. That's you wanting to draw 2 cards.
No, I'm not nearly as happy.
I think I've broken you this video.
Maybe. Making videos with your heart is always a mistake. You ever get those comments, my friend? You ever get those comments? Will, we just want you to do what you love. We just want you to make whatever you want to make. We will watch no matter what, as long as you're having fun. You don't know
I'm having fun. I think our audience is having fun.
I enjoy. Oh no. All the trap like downsides, right? From previous, we talked about the previous downsides of traps. This is a trap. Skip your next 2 draw phases. I mean, if you're literally going to win the game the next turn, maybe, but well, like we're 2 cards and then skipping 2 draw phases sounds pretty bad. I guess the way it's better is if you're drawing more cards than you would have from a draw phase, because you have a lot of these reckless greeds or ways to get them back, so you just keep doing them. And we talked about the Jar of Greed, that if they target to remove the trap card and you do this, now you're up 2 cards, but you're down 2 draw steps. Is the monkey's paw good? I can't imagine it getting banned with what you've showed me. Can't. Trying to put myself into this world, I can't imagine with what you've shown me so far that this got banned, but is it even good? There are cards in Magic's history that say skip your draw step and are ongoing. They're an enchantment, so they don't leave the battlefield, but they give you other ways to get a lot of cards. Like a lot of cards.
What do you mean? This is a lot of cards. It's Pot of Greed.
It's 2 cards.
And Yu-Gi-Oh! The cards I've shown you, 2 cards is a lot.
It is.
You see what we're working with.
But essentially, it's 1 card, because when it goes to your next turn, when you can use those cards and you skip your draw step, you're basically down 1 right there.
So we don't worry about the future. We worry about what's in front of us. Look at the shiny object in front of us now.
It's
2 cards.
Closer to Jar of Greed than it is to Pot of Greed. And Jar of Greed is apparently fine. So the only real question is, like, having that velocity of 1 more card, is that worth it?
Like you said, if you win the game, it doesn't matter.
If you win the game, it doesn't matter. See, you keep saying stuff. You keep yapping. And I'm a damaged individual at this point. I'm on the floor. My body is hurting. My mind is aching. And you're just like, are you trying to, like, you're like holding out your hand like, hey, I'll help you up. And then you're like, psych, fell on his face again.
If you look in the art, there's a snake in the treasure chest. That's me right now.
Yeah. Oh, it is. So are you trying to, like, throw me a little help here to make me think that you're not going to help me up, or are you actually trying to help me up this time?
I don't know. What do you think I would do, CGB?
I don't think it matters. I'm supposed to look at the card. You and I have this in common. No matter what the meta is, at points we have to go with our instincts about a card. I don't see it, dude. If you had a bunch of these in your deck, then maybe you're technically up when you're, like, hitting those draw 2s, but skipping the draw phase is so like, if you chained a couple of these to get up like 3 or 4 cards, that could be really good. That does require you to really, really draw into several of these, and this is a horrible top deck in the late game, I think. What would get this banned or restricted? How would it do? How would that happen? Some other cards, maybe there are multiple cards that, like, skip your draw phase and pay you in a similar way in cards or resources, so you just never get a draw phase, but you get all these resources for never having a draw phase. God,
I will let you know that you can evaluate this in a vacuum. Okay. Your example does not exist.
Yeah, then it's purely a question of the velocity of it, because, like I said, I think it's closer to Jar of Greed than a Pot of Greed. And is the velocity what's going to matter? I don't think so.
Okay.
I think at the end of you said there were even 3 more cards that were like Jar of Greed that get played in a format where Jar of Greed is now played.
Three other copies of the same card. So there's 6 total. 3 Jar of Greed, 3. Yeah. I was just clarifying.
Yep. Yeah. I think you just play that first. Why take a downside? Why take a risk? Especially if they were to counter or do something to this. I'm gonna say that this card is. I don't know if it's bad. It might have been used at some point, but it's pretty close to bad. At least there are better cards. So I'm gonna say this card is fine.
Final answer.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you picked up on this. With Reckless Greed, if you activate multiple at the same time, it actually stacks the downside. So instead of, if you activate 2 and draw 4 cards, you don't skip your next 4 draw phases. You only still skip the next 2 because they were both activated on the same turn. So
that is not how it would work in Magic at all.
So well, you learned something today. You learned something today.
It says the next 2. They can't resolve at the same time.
They can, because you activate Reckless Greed, and then you activate another Reckless Greed. They're both on the chain.
But
they both resolve.
Something has to resolve first.
Yeah, they resolve in order. The second Reckless Greed resolves, then the first.
So when one resolves, then your next 2 draw phases are the 2 that would come after. How the world should
they
work.
were both activated on the same turn, so both cards are checking the next 2 draw phases at the same time. So you can draw 4, potentially 6, if you have 3 copies of Reckless Greed, and only skip 2 draw phases.
I hear what you're saying, but in terms of the way it's phrased, it doesn't say skip the draw phase on your next turn. It says the next draw phase, and you don't have a next draw phase till the next 2 draw phases.
Yeah, you have the next 2 draw phases, exactly. So, as a result, this card was actually limited. It was never banned. In early Yu-Gi-Oh, I think they just didn't want the ability to stack multiple Reckless Greeds together, just because it is like really unfair if someone is able to chain those together.
It's unfair because the rules don't work right.
Hey, you know what? BKSS, because Konami said so. That's what we always say. So,
gotcha.
When it comes to Reckless Greed, this card has actually seen, I don't want to say like modern play, but it has seen play throughout other eras in Yu-Gi-Oh! Probably throughout the middle of its lifespan, in other trap-based decks such as Paleozoic, other decks. You can take advantage of the fact that this is a trap card, that it draws you cards, and maybe your deck will generate advantage in other ways so that you can sort of mitigate the fact that you don't get to draw for 2 turns. It is strategy dependent. Some like Exodia decks, again, would play a card like this because, yes, you don't get to draw for 2 turns, but let's say you have 2 Reckless Greed and you only have 4 cards left in the deck. If you just need 1 piece of Exodia, you flip these up, you draw, you win the game. It doesn't matter, right? This card is unlimited now. It's fine. It's totally okay. But funny enough, it will see play from time to time. Just I think it's really slow by like modern Yu-Gi-Oh standards. But throughout like a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, this card has come up from time to time. A lot of people would say it's not great, but in the right decks, it can be okay. But it was limited for quite some time. But for the most part, it's at 3 now, and it's fine. So I think for the most part, your assessment's correct. But early on, this card could just basically be like a dumb auto win if you happen to just stack multiple together, which is kind of stupid.
You are a snake.
I am that snake. I am that snake. Here, okay, you know what? I'm going to help you out, buddy. It's the last card of the video. I'm going to help you. I've shown you all of these cards. There's no way you are going to go, oh, for whatever. I don't know how many cards we've gone through at this point. I'm going to show you the closest analog yet. I'm going to show you the peak of card draw in Yu-Gi-Oh! Behold, the reincarnation of Pot of Greed right before your very eyes.
Pot of Avarice. Spell. Target 5 monsters in your graveyard, shuffle all 5 into the deck, then draw 2 cards. 5 monsters, huh? It's a lot of monsters. And then you got to put them back in your deck. If you get a monster from the extra deck, does it go into your deck now?
It shuffles back into the extra deck per game mechanics. It doesn't shuffle back. It just gets placed back.
I love that it says the deck, but we have multiple decks there with us. You know, it's like I got to get really into the weeds on this writing now because it's clearly not actually about reading the card. It's about understanding what they've made up about the card that they don't put on websites. In
fairness, Pot of Avarice was printed only when fusion monsters existed, and fusion monsters weren't very good in old Yu-Gi-Oh! So I think it was worded that way because of the fact that at the time, people were only using it to shuffle main deck monsters back into the main deck, if that makes sense.
They did put a cost on it. They did put a cost on it.
Yeah, you say everything's free in Yu-Gi-Oh! I've been showing you stuff that isn't free.
So delve cards are cards in Magic that like require you to have cards in the graveyard to cast them at a powerful cost, but they have powerful effects. And those cards are very good. At times in Magic they were banned and restricted, but generally speaking, like there are formats where they exist where they are not banned and restricted. But there are always a conversation about them. One of them, Treasure Cruise, is a draw 3, but it requires you to have, like, to cast it for 1 mana, you have to have 7 cards in your graveyard.
That's crazy. Oh my god.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be insane. Yeah.
Yeah, so that card has been amazing in Standard, which was a smaller format. It was banned in other formats, and it is currently on like some people want it banned, some people want it legal in the Pioneer format. Which is,
wait, so how does Delve work as a mechanic? Does Delve shuffle them back into the deck and then you draw 3?
It does not. It exiles the cards.
Oh, that's different. Okay.
So they're gone for good.
Okay. Well, in your game.
Would you rather shuffle them in than exile them? I think you would. Exile's bad. Exile's gone forever. These at least are back in your deck. Yeah. Well, in your game, maybe Exile isn't that way. But yeah, having them back in the deck and then drawing the cards is probably, some people in some way probably like that.
Okay.
It's probably a good thing in some ways. Yeah, but instead of this just being like no cost, play this, draw 2, now you have to do the combats, summon the thing, special to summon the thing, tribute summon the thing, and then you get to do it. So how often, like, it does make these in multiples worse. If you draw 2 of these and 4 monsters, you're gonna have a bad time. So similar to like Treasure Cruise, if you just didn't get enough cards in the graveyard, Treasure Cruise, you could just pay more because you could just pay mana instead, because on its basis, it's an 8 mana spell. So you could just pay mana to make up what wasn't in the graveyard. This doesn't have that option. You have to have 5 monsters in your graveyard to play this at all. That's what I'm understanding from Target, right?
For context, I don't know if it helps your evaluation or not. If you activate this, target the 5 monsters in your graveyard. If your opponent has a response to move any of those 5 targets out of the graveyard, either by exiling it or doing anything like that. It doesn't have to be all 5. It can just be 1. This card will not resolve.
That wouldn't happen in Magic. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That'll feel great. I imagine that there are decks that tried to take max advantage of this by just having a ton of ways to fill the graveyard with monsters and actually get to run 3 of these. But there is a fail state. There is definitely a fail state. We've covered it. There are multiple fail states. Then, like, your average deck, just your, like, everyday kind of deck, can probably run... Maybe it doesn't run 3 because the risk of drawing multiples and not being able to play it might just mean that you lose from having a bad turn. It sounds like falling behind in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is brutal. So, maybe you go with 2 or 1. But it does feel like every deck with a monster theme would want some number of this. Some number of this. And the cost and the downside is enough that, like, did this have to get banned? This is selling nostalgia. This is being like, look, it's Pot of Greed, guys. We gave you Pot of Greed. And then they're like, it doesn't quite work. It is not quite the same, is it? But you already spent your money.
Well, for context, Pot of Greed is banned at this point.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So they are doing the thing they came to do. Did they have to restrict or ban this? The kind of the recursive element of this has some dangers to like crazy combo decks going off, right? So like if you are drawing most of your deck or milling most of your deck and then just putting back in the very best cards, like you shown me a few cards and they got banned, but we're basically able to mill a bunch of your deck, right? So if you like mill a big chunk of your deck and then use this to put certain cards back in, draw 2 of them, especially like if 3 of them are the same monster and 2 are the other monster, it kind of just creates a win con on the spot if those 2 monsters like combo for something insane. So like that right there is nasty, but the problem is probably whatever milled your whole deck. Maybe not specifically this card. I could still see this card getting hit because of the card draw thing. I'm really torn because this is definitely a good card and there are probably ways to abuse it in endgame and combo deck states, but was this card the problem? Because in those situations, other cards probably had to get the axe, and you've shown me some in the past. Their name escapes me, but like if you had this card and the card that let you mill your whole deck, you basically have a combo win right there. You can draw whatever 2 monsters you want, assuming you had multiple copies of them in your graveyard. This card, it's not fine. but did it have to get banned? It's really a tough call because the cost is actually useful. There are definitely states though where it is nutty. You know what? Restricted, I think, is totally fine. The card might be fine in multiples because there's a downside to multiples, but maybe it pushed the deck that was like, oops, all monsters in the graveyard all the time over the top, because that deck takes advantage of Pot of Avarice in the way other decks can't, or it pushed some kind of a combo deck over the top where they flip their deck over, put the two monsters in multiple copies, like I said, draw into them, win the game. So I'm gonna go with, I think I'm gonna go with restricted, but I've had a terrible video, and actually this one is one I'm most conflicted about, so whatever, let's go.
That's why we saved it for last. So, restricted, final answer. Pot of Avarice. Everyone loves, especially old school Yu-Gi-Oh players, everyone loves Pot of Avarice. When they announced that this card was coming out, especially because it was on the heels of Pot of Greed getting banned not too long prior, this was exciting for a lot of people because people love drawing cards, as you know. And funny enough, Pot of Avarice got limited, restricted, very early on in Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan because I think they were afraid of like it being another Pot of Greed type situation where even though it does have a cost, yes, I think they kind of wanted to just have the guardrails up just in case there was some like way that this card got abused. So it was limited very early on in Yu-Gi-Oh's lifespan. And as you said, this was a card that basically every deck in early Yu-Gi-Oh would play a singular copy of. It was too inconsistent to play multiple Avarice because if you drew them early on and you didn't have the graveyard set up, it was a nightmare. But having a singular copy, if the game is going longer, to be able to refuel your deck with some of your best monsters and draw a couple cards, it would get you back in the game, right? It was a bit of a comeback mechanic. Not that Yu-Gi-Oh was devoid of comeback mechanics, but it's a very simple, just ubiquitous one that all decks could play. And so you would see a lot of decks around this time just playing a singular copy of Pot of Avarice. I think the one thing you may have potentially overlooked is the fact that this is an eternal format. And eventually, Pot of Avarice was a card that made its way to unlimited status because not that people were, doing anything like crazy with it, but it was more the fact that even if it was at 3, people would only play a singular copy anyway. Playing 3 wasn't, it was making your deck less consistent. So people would only play 1 even if it was at 3. So once we start getting into these new summoning mechanics that you've learned about, such as synchro summoning and such, it was not difficult for players to find ways to fill the graveyard with more than 5 monsters in the very first turn very easily. Also, we talked about how cards from the extra deck will go back into the extra deck through Pot of Avarice, so not in the main deck. So it's not inconceivable that you send several monsters from the extra deck back into your extra deck, and only maybe shuffle 1 or 2 cards back into your main deck. So you're not even making the consistency of your deck any worse as a result, or as worse as it would be if you shuffled 5 back, right? So you have a higher chance of drawing the cards you actually want to draw. But unfortunately, when it got to the point that people were figuring out how to, or when the cards were released, I should say as well, when people were figuring out how to dump 5, 10, 15 monsters into the graveyard with relative ease, Pot of Avarice became a card that became very out of hand very quickly because of the fact that there's no once per turn clause on this card, because of the fact that basically when you have a way to mitigate the cost of this card, it basically became 3 copies of Pot of Greed. And as a result, Pot of Avarice got banned for several years. It's at 3 now. It's actually okay to be at 3. But it was banned for...
Why not restrict it? Why not restrict it then? That sounds like the right time for a restriction, whereas the first restriction was just teaching people to play well.
I think it's just a matter of, again, I've told you many times, just even getting a singular +1 in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so powerful that I think they just wanted to ban it, to be honest with you. I just don't think they wanted to deal with this card because the more they released these archetypes that were very graveyard reliant, and I also think they were looking down the pipeline at the newer archetypes that they were releasing into the game because obviously dev cycles work in these like 2 to 3 year windows. I think they knew it wasn't getting much better with like the graveyard filling archetypes because they only got better and better as time progressed. And so I think they just decided to ban it for several years to be like, okay, we don't have to worry about a free draw 2 being in the game when all these decks are playing out of the graveyard during this time. But very fun card, very iconic card for like old Yu-Gi-Oh! And even newer Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially. Just a cool retrade of an old favorite. So I thought you'd appreciate it.
I definitely got some... A little cope here. A little cope. I definitely got some very wrong. But there are some
I would say all, but okay.
There are some in this video that I don't feel I got very wrong. Yeah,
okay.
Actually, maybe I got them wrong, but I feel like my thinking was correct in a few places, and whoever decided banned or restricted was completely inconsistent. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying right now, because everything we learned about some of the other restricted cards said, well, yeah, then why would they have to ban this? But okay, sure. Let's make up new rules just to spite me. It's fine.
Well, that's the fun of these videos, right? Is that even though logically it may or may not make sense, that doesn't mean that's what they decided when they created the ban list. Also money, right? At the end of the day, maybe, you know, they're just smiling.
I tried using that earlier and it was wrong. So don't tell me now money matters. Wait, what?
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shoutouts to Shout1317, Sim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fadeleaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Flannel Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, Wonder Waffle, MBT canceled by community soon, canceled by all committee soon, canceled by all players soon, Corvain, Absolute Angriest Peacock of the Edison Club, Daniel Howell, and life keeps using solemn judgment on my hopes and dreams. Thank you all so much again for watching, and we will see you next time.